Hello and welcome to this week's What Were They Thinking? Among the news items we have for you is confirmation of a new variant of the CCP virus, a strong vote to reintroduce fluoride into the water in Calgary, the first successful transplant of a pig kidney into a human, and somewhat rewriting history of America. The timestamps for these and other news items can be found in the description box below. Let's start with the new variant of the CCP virus, specifically a new variant of the Delta type, which would make it a subtype rather than a new variant by itself. Compared to the Delta variant, it is still very rare, but the AY.4.2 has been monitored in a number of countries just in case. The reason for that is fairly simple. Although it only accounts for a small fraction of the overall cases that they've found and sequenced, it does account for about 11% of the Delta variant cases in the US. That's a pretty big difference between research and sequencing versus clinical results. We are somewhat fortunate that, with regards to this variant, we aren't seeing the huge jump in infection rates as we did with the Delta variant as a whole, where the Delta variant was drastically more infectious with its small number of mutations. Only 2 mutations have been found in this newer subtype, and they don't appear to have increased its infectivity at all, although they are found in the spike protein, which may in theory have helped it be more infectious. Further to a new variant, which is uncomfortable enough as it is, the CDC has agreed that the FDA and other government agencies should sign off on the deployment of booster shots. Specifically, they've approved Moderna and the Johnson & Johnson boosters. What's more is that they have agreed that people can get a different vaccine for a booster than they would otherwise have had previously. In the past, it would have been Pfizer, and then a third Pfizer shot. The same thing goes with AstraZeneca, Johnson & Johnson, and Moderna. Having now a 3-dose regime brings them in line with what Israel has, and Israel's data strongly indicates that a third booster substantially improves the rate of serious infection and hospitalization, especially among the elderly. The introduction of a booster and its endorsement as is means that roughly a third of the American adult population is eligible for that booster shot. And these tend to be people who have existing predisposition to infection, comorbidities, age, and a few other factors that all put them in a much higher risk category. This should help with longer-term support and protection for these individuals. Getting a third booster shot will improve their immunity, and even if it doesn't prevent infection, it will substantially reduce the severity, duration, and effect of that infection. It's your fairly standard long-term public health measure. There are other long-term public health measures that we've seen with similar effectiveness. One of these was bringing fluoride to water. The idea was fluoride is necessary for teeth health. Specifically, it's the enamel around the teeth. If you have enough of it in your diet, then a little bit extra added to water won't do much. If you have inadequate intake via your diet, drinking water with fluoride in it in trace amounts will supplement that and should help to prolong the protection of your teeth. Not that long ago, Calgary voted to remove fluoride from its water. This is something we've spoken about. And the results are interesting. Historically, there hasn't really been any even remotely long-term evidence of what happens if a population has fluoride in its water and then it's taken out. It's nearly always the other way around. There's no fluoride and then fluoride is added. This has made comparisons difficult, and so there's often a contention that how do we know it's effective and safe if there isn't a control to compare it to? Well, we have that now through Calgary. What happened was relatively simple. 62% of the population voted to bring it back into their water supply, while 38% said no. This means in the near future, they will have fluoride back again. This is an ongoing issue in Calgary. It took a long time for it to be put into the water supply, rejected repeatedly until 1971 and approved in 1989. It was then removed in 2011. In 2021, they are now adding it back. If you look at the time periods from before it was introduced, when it was present, and then when it was taken away, you can begin to see what sort of effect it has. While we won't go into the depth of detail here, there is a link to our video on fluoride in water in the cards above the video. Our next news item isn't public health related, but is health related, and that is the successful transplant of a pig kidney into a human. As we've previously described, there is a very high demand for organs to be transplanted into individuals that need them, but a relatively low supply of people willing to donate their organs. This leads to long waiting times and often death as a result. Kidneys and livers are perhaps the worst for this. As a result, trying to find alternative ways to do it has been one of the top priorities. One method has been the kidney transplant chain. This starts with one charitable individual who donates their kidney to someone who needs it, but they have someone who's willing to give them their kidney, but they're not able to match. If the first person offers them their kidney, then their willing donor offers it to the next person who needs it, and so you create a series of donors who act out of reciprocity for their either loved one, family member, or similar being given a kidney from yet another stranger. This still hasn't dealt with the issue though of there not being enough. It's just reduced it somewhat. This is where the use of animal kidneys comes in, particularly pigs. These are otherwise known as a xenotransplant. Xeno meaning other species, and transplant being, rather obviously, the moving of the organ. The success of this research has to be taken with a very large grain of salt. It's described as successful, and you could argue that it was indeed successful. However, it was only tested for 54 hours. Further, the patient who received it was already brain dead and being kept alive artificially. This means that you could test the kidney's function, the movement of blood, and everything else to ensure that it worked. Arguably, you could also establish whether or not there was an immunological response, and various other things had occurred around that time. This is the metric that they've used to define success. The organ worked, it was from an animal, and they could, somewhat, possibly find a way of addressing the significant shortage of organs that are donated for people who need them. There are still going to be a massive range of issues. The two most immediate ones are going to be getting regulatory approval to do this. Taking an animal organ and putting it in a human is very questionable as far as regulations go, and so there's going to be an uphill battle to get it approved. The second issue they're going to face is whether or not the donation is rejected. The problem with organs and in fact tissues from just about every other animal is they have surface antigens that the human body recognizes as being foreign. In this case, it's a sugar. The sugar's called alpha-gal, and once it's identified, the immune system starts attacking whatever it's attached to. This means that the transplanted organ from a pig, while it may be successful in its purposes initially, will eventually be rejected, attacked, and then destroyed. The reason this particular pig kidney works is that they've genetically modified the pig so it does not produce that particular sugar. Therefore, there's no antigen for the immune system to use as an identifying marker. From this, they could establish that yes, the kidney will work and won't be attacked by the immune system based on that alone. In other news about animals being modified, or in this case, changing over time, studying elephants has shown that as a result of poaching and selective hunting of the elephants with the biggest and most pronounced and desirable tusks, more elephants are being bred with much smaller tusks. This has, over time, reduced the size until they have, for all intents and purposes, gone away entirely in certain parts of the population. This is a form of evolution. The elephants with the biggest tusks would be killed first, and so this would leave the elephants with smaller tusks to breed. They would do so and create more elephants with small tusks, while fewer elephants with big tusks would exist. Eventually, these elephants with small tusks would also be hunted, and so they would keep shrinking. This is what the research appears to have found. More or less, by selectively choosing, by hunting, which elephants would breed, we've made it so that the thing you're after from the elephant, tusks, isn't there at all anymore. From a numbers point of view, normally you'd see about 2% of female elephants having no tusks at all. But between 1977 and 2004, this went from 18.5% to 33% in the area being examined. What is worrying, especially from a conservation point of view with this, is what appears to be a genetic cause for the reduction in size. This was stimulated by the fact that very few, if any, tuskless male elephants were seen, but female elephants were seen frequently with and without tusks. They traced this down to a gene called AMELX. It's a female-specific X chromosome gene, and it has relationships to bone and teeth development in humans and tusks in elephants. What they believe occurs in the elephants as it does in humans is when the male has this and it is otherwise a disrupted or mutated version, they will die, whereas the females will use the other X chromosome to make up for its inadequacies. If this is the case, then it means that the chances of male elephants being born, thereby being able to reproduce and sustain the elephant population, go down as a consequence of the change in this gene, which is helping to protect female elephants, but may be killing male elephants or preventing their birth and living state. Going now from animal news to historical and archaeological news, and our last news item for the week. It's a discovery of 1,000-year-old Viking remains, or at least evidence of them, in North America, 1021 CE. That is exactly 1,000 years ago. The way this was done by looking at the carbon dating of wood that had been worked with metal tools that were not native to the indigenous peoples of the area. It is known that Vikings used the same sort of metal tools and similar archaeological sites, and so they can clearly say that, yes, there's a relationship between the Vikings and these remains. By carbon dating them, they can find that this is the earliest European engagement in North America. This is nearly 500 years earlier than the otherwise major colonization and landings in Europe by the Spanish and British. Doing this has fundamentally rewritten some of our earliest conceptions about European interactions with North America. Who, where, what, and when. In this case, it appears to have been the Norse, and they were setting up some pretty comprehensive camps at this time, and we can prove this using some pretty solid evidence. Admittedly, some of that evidence and research methodology is new. Other parts are far more comprehensive. That's all the news we have for you this week. Thank you for watching. If you have found it interesting, consider liking, sharing, and subscribing. Please post any comments, questions, or suggestions that you have below.